Strange but true stories. Tales from the light side, the dark side, and the other side. I'm Steve White. Have you ever been in a situation where you know something is absolutely true, but nothing around you supports it? Not that you think it may be true, but you know you experienced something, have vivid recollections about it, and yet, in your current reality, there is no proof it ever happened. Or maybe something that can't happen in a logically configured world like this happened anyway. Such is the case with the following stories. Call it a glitch, a glimpse of the multiverse perhaps, or something just purely strange and unexplainable. All of the following stories, except for one, were submitted to Strange But True from viewers like you. Registration Vexation. One morning, I went to the mailbox and found that my new car registration and sticker for the license plate had arrived. I went to the house and got a damp paper towel to wipe any dust from the license plate so that the sticker would adhere better. I placed the registration in the glove box and then attached the new sticker to the plate. While I was crouched at the rear of my car, my neighbor came up the sidewalk and kindly said good morning. I returned her greeting and then walked back to my house. At the time, I had two very large planters on the patio with small fruit trees in them. As I approached the front door, a black and white cat jumped out of one of the pots and ran across the yard. It startled me a little bit, but I didn't think much about it. 3 months later, I was driving home from the grocery store and I was pulled over by the police. The officer said that my license plate had expired 4 months earlier and asked to see my registration and proof of insurance. I was just dumbstruck as to how my license plate tag was expired. I dug around in the glove box, but couldn't find my new registration. I told the officer that I was certain that I had put the new sticker on the plate and placed the new registration in the glove box 4.5 months ago. She let me off with a warning and instructed me to look again at home and get the sticker and new registration put in the car. I thanked her and drove home feeling very confused. I ran the whole thing over in my mind, remembering distinctly the application of the sticker, the neighbor saying hello, and the black and white cat jumping out. Oh well, maybe the sticker had fallen off, but that wouldn't explain where the registration was. It was baffling. The next day, after scouring my house, I went to the DMV and sat through the morning fully expecting that they would find record of my payment and current registration in their computer system. But no, they couldn't find any record of what I was sure I had done months before. So I paid for another registration and went home, went into the house, got a damp paper towel to wipe any dust from the plate. I then went to my car, placed the registration in the glove box, and attached the new sticker to the rear license plate. While I was crouched at the rear of my car, my neighbor came up the sidewalk and again said good morning. I returned her greeting and then walked back to my house. As I approached the front door, a black and white cat jumped out of one of the tree planters and ran across the yard, just as I had remembered 4.5 months before. Next stop, Seattle? So in 2014, my daughter was in Los Angeles visiting her grandmother. I was living in Seattle at the time and was driving from Seattle to LA to pick her up and bring her home. The drive is straight down Interstate 5 from Seattle to LA. It's approximately 1,200 miles, and you can drive it straight in 24 hours or so, or break it down into 2 days, driving 12 hours a day. I've driven it before, and so on this occasion I left Seattle at around 5 o'clock in the evening, and 3 hours later I was just getting on the bridge crossing into Oregon from Washington. I was on the phone with my daughter telling her I just pulled into Oregon. I had driven to Portland many times before, so I'm on the phone with her for about 30 minutes as I'm driving south on I-5. I see a small sign in the dark that says Kalama, which is in Washington State. I was still chatting and just disregarded what the sign said, half thinking there must be a Kalama, Oregon, too. About 5 minutes later, I see another sign that says Kalama, next exit. What? I told my daughter I'd call her back. I had no idea where I was. I wasn't in Oregon anymore. I was not going south on I-5 all of a sudden. I decided to get off at the next exit and figure out where I was. I plugged in the Garmin and it told me I was heading north on I-5, towards Seattle. That was impossible. I never got off the freeway. I never took an exit. I took the only bridge there is and stayed on the freeway going 60 miles per hour on cruise control. Therefore, it would have been impossible for me to have exited the freeway, turned around, and go back over the bridge into Washington State going 60 miles per hour the whole time. I was freaked out. At least, I would know if I drove that bridge again going north. I looked at the clock and it was 11 o'clock. That was also impossible, as just over a half hour ago I was entering Oregon. It was only 8. I had just lost 2.5 hours. I had just hung up with my daughter. I managed to be heading the exact opposite way of where I was a half hour ago, and I was even on the phone with my daughter less than a half hour. I looked at the time on my phone. I got back on Interstate 5 going south and had to drive another hour or so to get back to Oregon. I had lost hours, literally, and was totally turned around heading back home. I still cannot figure out what happened to this day. Registration manifestation. It was 1985, and I was visiting my grandparents in Puerto Rico for the summer. My grandfather, who we called Poppy, owned a 1965 Mustang. He loved to drive it, and anyone who visited got a slow but nice ride with him. He shared stories and talked about which places were best to buy bread or empanadas or whatever he thought you needed to do while you were there. On one particular day, he wasn't up for driving, and for the first time allowed someone else to drive his car. I was 18 at the time and was thrilled and honored to be given the opportunity to drive his prize vintage Mustang. But I was also a little nervous. Obviously, 30 years ago, technology isn't what it is today. He handed me his registration papers, asking me to be responsible with the car and with the paper registration title. I took the request seriously and, of course, told him I would. I safely put the registration in my wallet in front of him and drove off with my aunt, uncle, and sister. We decided to go to the beach and enjoy the day. The day was beautiful, as it always seemed to be in Puerto Rico, and we spent a few hours swimming, eating, talking with the locals, and soaking up the sunshine. Around 3:30 in the afternoon, we decided to head back home. I carefully drove home and returned the car safe and sound. I reached for my wallet to give my grandfather his registration back. But my wallet wasn't in my pocket. I couldn't find it anywhere. It had his registration and my ID and money in it. I searched all over the place, in the car, the rooms, under the bed, around the house, the beach bag. I asked my aunt, my sister, my uncle if they remembered anything. I even looked under the mattress. I was so disappointed in myself. I searched for at least 30 minutes and couldn't find it anywhere. I was so ashamed. I didn't have the courage or the heart to tell my grandfather I lost the registration. He would be disappointed in me and probably would never let me, or for that matter anyone else, drive his car again. How could I have been so irresponsible? I was sitting in my bedroom wondering what to do next. I stopped searching, closed my eyes, and I said out loud, "Bring me the paper, please. I don't want to disappoint my grandfather. I know you hear me. Whoever you are, please just give me back the registration." And when I opened my eyes and was ready to walk out to the bedroom, I looked down, and at my feet, there it was. Unfolded and laying right at my feet was the registration paper. My eyes couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was nervous, but relieved. I really didn't know what happened, or how, or what, but I know it wasn't there a few seconds ago. It was just the registration, not my wallet or my money or anything else. I picked it up and carefully looked at it. Yes, it was Poppy's registration paper. I couldn't believe what just happened. I went to my grandfather and handed it to him. I didn't tell him what just happened or about my desperate in silence for about 10 minutes, pondering. I couldn't figure it out then, and I still can't now. Throughout the rest of the trip, I kept looking for my wallet, but was never able to find it. A few weeks later, I'm back at home in the States, and I received a phone call from a guy, and he said, "Hey, you don't know me, but I was in Puerto Rico a few weeks ago and found your wallet at the beach." I was surprised and happy to know someone found my wallet and lived in the same town I did, and also was willing to make the effort to return it to me. He told me I could meet him at his job and he would give it back to me. I met him and he handed me my wallet. My cash and cards and my ID were all there. I asked him if there had been a registration paper for a '65 Mustang inside. He said no, it was exactly as he had found it. I immediately offered him all the money that I had in the wallet and thanked him 100 times over. I was shocked and amazed for a second time. What are the odds of someone finding your wallet on vacation who also lives near you and then makes that kind of effort? But as I drove, it was for the registration paper to be removed from my wallet and wind up at my feet several weeks before. I still cannot wrap around it. New Coke? Nope. Quantum Coke. I was moving out of my house and had brought a friend with me to help lift some things that I couldn't handle on my own. Now, he is a total paranormal skeptic, and he and I often joke that if he hung out with me long enough, surely something would happen, as I have had many experiences of paranormal events, ranging from familiar spirits, UFOs, doppelganger events, almost all with witnesses. Now, to preface this story, I should explain I love Coca-Cola, and I drink it almost daily. The truck I was driving at the time had no cup holders built in. I installed my own clip-on cup holder that hangs on the inside of the door. I bought it to hold the fountain drinks that I frequently enjoy. So as per my normal routine, I picked up a soda before driving out to the house. As always, I got ice, filled up the cup, walked out to my truck where my friend was waiting for me, and put the drink in the cup holder. We headed to the house, and when we arrived, I grabbed my soda and walked inside to start carrying some of the heavier items outside. We worked about 30 minutes or so, and decided to have a smoke in the truck. I grabbed my soda, with ice still in the cup, and walked out to the truck to smoke a cigarette. We had gone out to the truck instead of standing on the porch because it was fall in Alaska, and it was cool outside, so we preferred to be warm and to be sitting down, as I had already moved all the furniture on the deck. I absent-mindedly went to set my soda in the cup holder in the truck when my hand bumped something already in the cup holder. There was a drink just like the one I had in my hand. I was shocked and looked at my friend, who looked back and forth between the cup and the cup holder and the cup in my hand. Now, neither of us had been in the truck since we had arrived, and there was no way I could have had a soda in the cup holder and the one in my hand. The one in my hand was definitely the fresh one I had picked up on the way to the house. The one in my hand still had ice and condensation on the outside of the cup. The cup in the cup holder had soda in it, but no ice. And when I picked it up, there was no condensation on the bottom of the cup or on the sides, as if it had been there for a while, as in hours or days. Another detail, the truck is a manual transmission, so there's no way I could have held a soda in my hand, shifted gears, and driven. And why would I, when I could park my drink in the cup holder? Even my skeptic friend could not explain what had happened. We tried to rationalize every option, even considering a random passerby, stopping in and sitting in my truck, setting the Coke in the cup holder, but decided that was extremely unlikely, considering I lived 20 miles from town on a quiet country road on 5 acres. To this day, we refer to the event as the Quantum Coke, and can't explain it any other way. DC or Marvel? Which universe is this? In the summer of 2005, I was hanging out with some friends at a now-defunct punk rock bar in Chico, California, called the Riff Raff Room. I'm not a big drinker, but I did have a PBR that night. There was a pretty decent band, and we had a good time just kind of hanging out. We parted ways around 10:30 that night. I still wanted to wander around town a little more, though. I walked around and found an area with a lot of record shops and cool little stores, including a small comic shop that was still open at 11 p.m. I'm a huge comic fan. And that night I was wearing a t-shirt with all the Marvel heroes on it, including Daredevil. I thought it was strange that the comic store was open so late, so I stepped in to check it out. There was a really cute goth girl working in the store. She was very polite, but kept staring at my shirt. I made a comment about being a Marvel fan, and she said, "Daredevil's not Marvel anymore. Marvel traded him to DC for the Flash." What? That's not right. Daredevil has always been Marvel. I just said something like, "Yeah, sure," thinking she was making some sort of joke that I wasn't getting. I looked around at the books. Sure enough, all the Daredevil books were DC, and all the Flash books were Marvel. There was even a poster of the Avengers featuring the Flash. So I went up to the girl again and I asked her when this happened. She told me it happened after the DC versus Marvel event back in the 90s. Again, what? I knew this couldn't be real. This made no sense. What kind of alternate comic book universe was this girl living in? I was always up with the comic book news. I would have heard of something that big. But I believed what I was seeing and bought an issue of DC's Daredevil. I'll never forget it because it had Grant Morrison's name on the cover. I'm a huge Grant Morrison fan. I also bought an issue of the Justice League with Daredevil fighting the Joker and the Royal Flush Gang. I left the store and noticed that, strangely, the street lights were all out in the neighborhood. I went home and didn't really think much more about my strange comic book experience anymore that night. The next morning I went to visit a friend. I told him about the weird comics, and when I took them from the bag, they were exactly the same as I remembered from the store. Daredevil by DC Comics, Justice League with Daredevil fighting the Joker. A short time later, I went back to Chico. I wanted to return to the comic book store and see if I could figure anything else out. But the comic store was gone. In its place was a small Scientology Dianetics storefront. That was weird. It hadn't been that long. A few months later, I packed my stuff up and moved to Los Angeles. I know I didn't leave anything behind in the move. I triple-checked my place before leaving for the final time. But I have never been able to locate those comics I bought that night since the move. Did I step through some alternate dimension? Or was this some really over-the-top, elaborate prank? I can't figure. But I remember very distinctly that comic book shop and the ones I purchased. My son's doppelganger? I know that what I'm about to tell you seems absolutely crazy, but I swear on my life that it is true. It still confuses me to this day. Now, I live in Green Bay, and I have 2 adult sons who also live in Green Bay. Early in 2017, my oldest son purchased a blue Buick LeSabre from his girlfriend's father. You know how your mind sees every car like that after someone close to you gets one? Well, he and his girlfriend and her 2 boys took a road trip to Pensacola, Florida in March so his girlfriend could attend a baby shower of a good friend of hers. They drove their newly purchased LeSabre down there. They were going to be gone for 7 days. Now, after he got there, he was posting videos and pictures of them swimming in the Gulf of Mexico and having a great time. I really enjoyed seeing him and how happy he was to be in Florida. He has this really distinctive beard, and I was wondering if it was a little uncomfortable having that full beard as warm as it was in Florida. Anyways, I had gotten up a bit later than normal and cleaned up my apartment quickly. I was very envious of my son because he was enjoying the beautiful sunshine and warm temperatures of Florida while I was here in Green Bay freezing. I received a text from my youngest son asking me if I would pick up his boy, my grandson, from school. I said, sure, I'd do that, and I got myself ready to go pick him up. At that time, my oldest son was working for the Packers organization. Lambeau Field is 6 blocks from my apartment complex. I drove to the entrance of the apartment complex and was about to make a right turn onto Cormier Road when I noticed a blue Buick LeSabre coming from the opposite direction. It looked just like the one my son had bought not too long ago. I looked and could hardly believe my eyes. I had to do a double take. Driving that car was my son, beard and all. He's a die-hard Falcons fan despite working for the Packers, and he had his favorite Falcons snapback hat on. I was speechless. I watched him drive to Oneida and take a right towards Lambeau. He was still in Florida, literally 1,000 miles away. He wasn't going to be back for another several days. I was already running late to pick up my grandson. If not for that, I would have followed him. But I think that if I were to catch up to him, I would have lost my mind. I never told him about it because I'm not sure I want confirmation of the unreal. But I know what I saw. This has been another edition of Strange but True Stories. All of these stories, except the comic book alternate reality story, were submitted to us by viewers like you. Have you ever had a strange experience that you can't quite explain, and if you told it to any of your family or friends, they would think you're crazy? Well, send that story to us. Strange, yet true stories. Stories from the light side, the dark side, and the other side. I'm Steve White. Glitches in time. Reality is a mysterious thing. From the beginning of time, people have reported accidentally slipping into pockets of time where events would repeat themselves or alter in some way. For some time now, certain physicists have speculated that we are actually living in a dimensional simulated program, much like the movie The Matrix. Are we only experiencing one reality, or are we constantly going between dimensions all the time without noticing? Here are 12 true submitted stories that will have you questioning the nature of reality. 1. Baby monitor time warp. As usual, the long workday was coming to an end, and I was dutifully putting the last load of laundered clothes away in our bedroom when I heard a ruckus on the baby monitor just a few feet away from me. My husband and toddler were both in the living room quietly watching TV as my 2-year-old drifted silently off to sleep, curled in my husband's lap as he caught the evening news. The bedroom door was straight in front of me, and I could see all the way down the hall to my husband and son in the lazy boy chair as this ruckus over the monitor continued. It didn't take long for me to realize the sounds were very familiar. Earlier in the day, I was in my toddler's bedroom, putting a load of folded clothes into the drawers and picked up some stray toys and books that weren't being played with at the time. As I was doing so, I was telling my son about the story of Jack and the Beanstalk for the first time. Now, I stood in disbelief as I heard the drawers being pulled open and shut, and rustling of the toys and books being put into the proper places. But I nearly fainted when I heard my son's voice over the monitor. I kept looking back and forth at my husband and now sleeping son in the chair in the living room, and the monitor sitting on my dresser that was literally replaying the specific events from earlier in the day. The monitor is a standard baby monitor bought from Walmart and is not a recorder, but instead monitors the sounds coming from the room as they are happening at present time only. I listened as my voice retold the story of Jack and the Beanstalk, and listened with familiarity as my son responded in baby talk to the tale he had never heard before. The incredible part was this all happened 5 hours earlier on the same day. I quickly called my husband into the room as he listened to the last part of the story with my voice coming through the monitor and our son's coos and chuckles. He stood stunned, and turned his head and looked at our sleeping son flopped peacefully over his shoulder. In disbelief, he asked, "How in the hell?" as his voice drifted off, trying not to miss a thing. I just stared at him in the same disbelief, and we both just shook our heads. This has never happened before or since, and became pretty clear from the beginning that we were listening to some kind of warp in time. I never imagined in a million years that I would be witness to it, and must admit, if it should happen to you, it is indeed one of the most incredible moments you can ever experience. 2. In the winter of 2009, my brother and I took a road trip from Portland, Oregon to Port St. Lucie, Florida, and back again. We made the trip to visit my sister who lives in Port St. Lucie. She and her husband just had their first child, and my brother and I were excited to see the newborn. On the trip to Port St. Lucie, we took a combination of freeways from the northwest all the way down to the southeast corner, basically a diagonal route. But several times throughout our voyage, we were tremendously delayed by snow. The trip, which should have taken no more than 3 days, ended up taking 5. Because of this delay, we had to cut short our visit with our sister's family. On the trip back to Portland, we decided to take I-10 the entire way. This stretch of freeway runs all the way from Florida to Los Angeles and would completely keep us away from the snow. The I-10 route added several hundred miles, but we both needed to be home for work the following Monday, and this was a surefire way not to be delayed. The first day of the return trip was uneventful, but we did manage to drive 1,300 miles from Port St. Lucie to San Antonio before stopping for the night. The plan was to make it all the way to Las Vegas the next night, which would leave us with about a 14-hour final day drive. The trip was going well. It wasn't until we left San Antonio that the glitches started happening. The car we took on this trip was a 2008 Honda Civic Hybrid. The entire trip we had been getting right around 35 miles per gallon. So we had become very aware of how many miles we could squeeze out of a tank. We knew to refuel around 350 miles or so. But we also knew we could stretch that number into the low 400s if we needed to. About 100 miles outside San Antonio, I noticed the fuel gauge was dropping noticeably faster than usual. So I clicked the button to change the dashboard display, only to see the car was getting barely 26 miles per gallon. At first I was shocked, but I reasoned it to possibly driving uphill the entire way. I still don't know. I thought throughout the course of an entire tank of fuel that it would eventually balance itself out and we would finish the tank within that 35 mile per gallon range. I was wrong. I kept a very detailed log of this entire trip, and this one stop in Fort Stockton, Texas, is the only anomaly in the entire book. The car, which had consistently held around 35 miles per gallon, suddenly finished an entire tank off at 25.8 miles per gallon. That's over a 100-mile difference in the vehicle's normal range. I still to this day cannot figure out why there was such a drastic shift in fuel consumption in that 300-mile stretch from San Antonio. But this story is not about miles per gallon and a wonky fuel gauge. I've reflected on that tank of gas several times since this happened, and I have almost come to the conclusion that it was an intentional glitch in order to make us pull over where we did. Our original plan was to refuel about 50 miles later in a town that I can't remember, but we obviously ran short on fuel. Anyway, with our GPS programmed to Las Vegas, we headed back onto the road in which the GPS directed. Pretty soon after we got back on the road, we realized we were no longer on I-10 heading west. Instead, we were north on Highway 285. We didn't think much about being off the interstate because many times throughout the drive, we had been directed onto bypass highways. We assumed this was just another such instance. After about an hour and a half of driving on Highway 285, we crossed into New Mexico, which was about 2 hours earlier than we should have crossed the border. By this time, we realized the GPS thought this was a more efficient way to go to Vegas, even though by all accounts, it is about an hour faster if we had stayed on the 10. We were annoyed, but decided to just stick it out with the GPS and keep heading north through New Mexico. Nearly 5 hours after refueling in Fort Stockton, my brother and I were hungry and decided it was time to find somewhere to eat. Driving through this part of New Mexico is kind of lonely. There are very few towns, and where there are towns, they are small and on the verge of becoming ghosts. I think their economies are built around helping travelers fill up their gas tanks. Other than that, I can't see a reason for them to exist. My brother and I have talked about what happened next so many times, but we still cannot figure it all out. We passed through a small town with a couple of gas stations, and we know the town was named Vaughn, New Mexico, and then about 20 miles later we drove through a town called Encino, which did not have a gas station, at least that we can recall. In fact, the second town really seemed to have much there, if anything. I wasn't sure if anyone was living there. I seem to remember questioning why it existed in the first place, but then quickly dismissed it and drove right through. Not even 10 miles after passing through Encino, we surprisingly came upon a city or a town that wasn't loaded in the GPS. This wasn't a big deal because I was using a cheap handheld that lost its signal all the time, but usually the only things it didn't display were newly built roads and recent construction areas. This city was definitely not brand new, so I figured the GPS was being buggy. The oddest part of finding this city, neither of us remember seeing any warning we were coming up on a town of this size. It had several fast food joints, restaurants, hotels, motels, grocery store, maybe an Albertsons, and even some bars. If I were to guess, I would say this city was roughly 10 to 20,000 people. We decided to pull off and grab a bite to eat. Normally, we probably would have grabbed some fast food, but my brother saw a Ruby Tuesdays and really wanted to go there. We had a couple of Ruby Tuesdays around the Portland area at the time. We had never been there, but we decided to give it a try. We had heard they had a pretty good salad bar, and I guess my brother was in the mood for something other than fast food. I went along with the suggestion because I was sick of eating junk. For the record, I will be Nick, and my brother will be George. We pulled into the Ruby Tuesdays parking lot, got out of the car, and walked in the restaurant. Immediately upon entering, a waitress who was milling around the hostess station says, "Oh my word, is that Nick and George?" Both my brother and I answered that it was indeed us, and the waitress went on to ask how life was in Portland. Suddenly it clicked. This girl knows who we are, but we are over 1,000 miles from home. Did we know her from back home? My brother and I both gave very basic, vague answers to her question, and I could tell she was kind of unsettled that my brother and I were being evasive. When we were seated, my brother immediately asked me where we knew her from, which was the same question I was going to ask him. I told him that I had no idea who she was, and that she obviously had mistaken us with some other people. Not more than a minute later, this guy, bartender, comes up and says, "No friggin' way! George and Nick! You back for jobs?" What? My brother went on to tell the guy they had us mistaken with some other people. He laughed and dismissed my brother's response as a joke. The bartender continued on seamlessly and started asking us how we fared in the 3-month anatomy and physiology course we had taken at Oregon State. I remember thinking all of a sudden, this is not a coincidence anymore. My brother and I had taken a 3-month 15-credit A&P class at Portland State. People acting like it was a celebration for us to have shown up, to everyone avoiding eye contact with us at all cost. After we finished up with our meals, the waitress came and told us that the cash registers were frozen and that our meal was on the house. I really wanted to ask the waitress what the name of the city was that we were in, but I also really wanted to get out of there. After leaving the restaurant, we were running pretty low on gas, so I decided to refuel before we got back on the highway. I assumed the name of the city would be printed on the receipt. We were not that lucky. This city strip was a one-way road on the eastern side of the highway. When we left Ruby Tuesdays, the only way to turn was right, and it headed straight back to northbound 285. In order to refuel, I would have to head north on the one-way street and turn right on a side street to head back to the southern part of town to the gas station. The only available right-hand turn off that one-way street was closed, so I was forced back onto the highway without fueling up. About 20 minutes later, we found a truck stop at the intersection of 285 and I-40, where we finally filled up. The rest of the trip was very ordinary. We talked at length about how weird that Ruby Tuesdays was in the middle of New Mexico. We came up with solutions about how we had doppelgangers with the same names. We joked about how people that look similar follow the exact same paths in life regardless of their upbringing. We talked ourselves into it being a major coincidence. When we finally got back to Portland, we decided to do a little research and find out the name of this town. We know we refueled at a truck stop at the intersection of 285 and I-40, which means that we had to have passed through Vaughn and Encino, so there should be a city between the truck stop and Encino. I don't see anywhere on the regular map or the satellite map where this little city could possibly be. We have never really been able to answer what happened that day. I can still vividly remember the waitress's face of unease by the way my brother and I were behaving. The bartender's voice changed when he figured out we were not the people he thought we were, and thinking the manager looked identical to the actor Ken Moreno. My brother and I know this stuff happened, but we have never been able to find out the solution. Maybe somebody can give us an answer, or maybe this was just a glitch. Maybe someone has driven that stretch of road and knows the town. Apparently, my brother and I worked at a Ruby Tuesdays in the middle of New Mexico. 3. Time glitch on a London street. My most powerful experience is a really strange one, and if it hadn't happened to two friends at the same time, I might even doubt it myself now. The three of us were walking through London from Camden Town down toward Mornington Crescent. We stopped to wait at a pedestrian crossing for the lights to change. The unusual plain green silhouette of a man walking for go, and plain red silhouette of a man standing for don't go, in case yours are different. As usual, when waiting for the lights to change, we all watched them impatiently. Eventually they changed, and we started crossing, keeping an eye on them to make sure we had time to make it across comfortably. Some of those crossings in London are a bit rough. About halfway across the road, there was, quite literally, a ripple in reality, a brief flash of disturbance. I looked up, and the lights had changed again, but not back to red. Suddenly, the plain green guy was wearing flares and glasses, had long, flowing hair cascading out behind him, and was surrounded by stars. Astonished, we stopped and exchanged glances. One of the others said, "Did you?" We both replied, "Yes," before he could finish the sentence. Not wanting to get killed, we finished crossing the road and then waited, looking nervously at the lights for them to go red again. Sure enough, the red guy had changed too. He was now carrying a briefcase, smoking a pipe with wisps of smoke rising, wearing a little Homburg hat, and he had big brogues on his feet. We stared at the lights for a while, but eventually continued on, feeling very confused. I mentioned this to a friend a couple of days later. She told me that she'd seen an article in the press talking about how the council had changed the plates over on the signs to mourn the death of a singer who had been famous in the 60s and who had lived in that street. She promised to bring me the article to have a look at the next time we met, which was about 2 weeks later. The council changing the plates makes sense. They almost certainly didn't change them in less than a blink of an eye, though. I went back a few days later to look at them more closely. The construction was standard. They were just normal plates of black dyed glass, based on the original template of the Walk/Go men, but with extra details etched out on them to provide the outfits. The plates were bolted in and took up the entire casing. There was no mechanism by which they could have slid down in front of the other plates or anything similar. To be absolutely sure, I hung around looking at them from a cafe across the road for about an hour, but they stayed changed. A week after that, I went back again for another look, to get a sketch. The lights were back to being perfectly normal. A couple of days later, it was the meeting again. When I spoke to the girl who had known about the singer, she looked at me blankly. Neither she nor anyone else had any memory of me mentioning changing lights, singers, or Camden before. No knowledge of any article. Nothing at all about any commemorations. It still feels to me like a brief swap into a closely aligned parallel dimension. 4. Every day when I get home from school, I always enter the front door and carry on through the den and then into the kitchen to get a snack. This day in particular, it was a Tuesday, and every Tuesday I get home to find my dog waiting for me. 99% of the time on Tuesdays, no one is home when I get back, so I was expecting to find my dog chilling in the lounge as soon as I got back. As I walked into the den, I see Otto's green ball on the floor, so I kicked it over the sofa into his cage, which sits against the wall behind the sofa. Whenever I get back, Otto was always in his cage, and this time he was nowhere to be seen. I checked all over the house. Otto can't get upstairs due to a little baby gate we have at the bottom of the stairs, and just assumed that my mom and sister have taken him out for the day. The last thing I checked before sitting down to get on with my homework was the cage once more, which he was not in. After about half an hour, my mom and sister get home, and I hear them both greeting Otto and his collar jingling. Upon hearing this, I jump up and ask why they are greeting him if he's been out with them all day. They tell me he was locked in his cage the whole time, and ask why I didn't let him out. I have no idea how the dog turned up in that cage because I am 100% certain he was not there when I checked. I have zero explanation for this bizarre occurrence. 5. But my son is in bed. I'm a young mother. I have a 4-year-old. He just turned 4 and started this preschool program where he goes for half the day and then comes home. So from 7:30 to 12:30, he's at school. This day in particular has stuck in my brain, and I have even asked my son about it multiple times. But him being 6, you can never really tell if he is agreeing or suggestively agreeing. This day started like any other, except I had the day off from work. My husband works nights, so that way he can get our son from school at noon. I get home at 4:30, and he leaves for work around 6. I'm rambling because this memory is just so strange to me. I had the day off, woke up at 8 a.m., asked my son if he wanted to stay home with me instead of going to school. He absolutely agreed. So I was getting him dressed for the day at home, a red t-shirt and some sweatpants. We went downstairs to eat some breakfast. I got him a bowl of cereal, and he ate it while I was cleaning up around the house. After he finished with the bowl, and it's like the couch wouldn't end. In my bed. First of all, not that weird that I could walk upstairs half asleep and get into my bed, right? I answered the phone. It's my son's school. They asked when I was going to come get my son, as the preschool program was over. I blatantly stuttered. What do you mean? Tommy is home today. She then said, No, he's here. Are you okay? Please come get him. The school program is over." So I kind of pushed it off to not make myself sound like a complete idiot. I told the lady I would come get him. I instinctively went into my son's room, and guess what? He's not there. I freaked out for a second and thought maybe I was dreaming after all. I went downstairs, put my shoes on, and realized that the TV was on. I usually turn it off. Maybe one time I didn't, but no big deal. Here's where it gets super strange, and I still can't wrap my head around it. I drove to my son's school to pick him up. He's in jeans and a white t-shirt. I grab his backpack. We head home. I get home and start to try to do some laundry. I went upstairs to grab my son's hamper, and I noticed the toy I allegedly dreamed about buying in the store in his bed. I walked downstairs to start the laundry, and there is a load in the washer. It's a few clothes, but on top is the red shirt and gray sweatpants I had put him in my dream. I specifically remember grabbing them out of his clean clothes drawer. What's even weirder is that I went to get a dryer sheet, and the box had never been opened, like it was brand new. At this point, I'm really tripping out. I haven't really asked my son if I'm crazy and delusional. The thing that sent shivers up my spine was the fact that my son's half-eaten cereal bowl was still in the kitchen sink. Did I dream my son's existence for a day? Or did I just completely glitch from one day to the next? I don't remember dropping him off at school. My husband doesn't get home until after 8 a.m., so no way he could have dropped him off. I tried to find the text of me telling my husband I was keeping our son home from school that day and not to swing by his school to get him. I couldn't find it. I'm just so paranoid now that this will happen again to me. I explained it to my husband, but of course he didn't believe me at all and tried to make me seem like I was joking. 6. This happened in November 2016. Me and my fiancée live around Piedmont Park in Atlanta. We've lived there for years and have gone running and walking. We've gone to concerts, festivals, the farmer's market, hundreds of times. We were walking from the other side of the park from seeing The Arrival at nearby Midtown Art Cinema, and it was after dark. From across the park we see lights we've never seen before. What is that? Are they getting ready for a concert or a festival or something? We thought maybe they'd put up a temporary structure for some upcoming event, so we walked over to check it out. It was a permanent brick structure, partially built into the side of a hill with a picnic table area on top and a public restroom in the bottom. The building is aged to look like it's been here since the 1980s. The lights were 2 huge street lights aimed at the building. It's at the main 12th Street entrance to the left side of the walkway across from the main event building that overlooks the duck pond. We had never seen it before. I'm convinced it's because it wasn't there before. Neither of us remember it being there. It's right behind where the Saturday farmer's market is every weekend. I've literally been through there hundreds of times. I'd know if there was a public restroom right there. I checked Google Maps, and it's listed there, public restrooms. This was one of the weirdest things I or my fiancé have ever experienced, but I'm oddly calm and indifferent when I think about it. How can something so big just magically appear, just wisp itself into existence, and more people not freak out about it? Does anyone else remember this building being there? How can both of us have no memory of it? 7. I'm very, very confused about what I saw recently. I live in a neighborhood in a big city. Not a downtown-looking area, but a neighborhood where every street is lined with houses and shops. Not really the place where creepy things happen. One night last week I was hungry and took a late-night trip to Taco Bell around 1 a.m. This night was unusually foggy, which is extremely rare for the area. I could only clearly see about 50 feet in front of me. I got my food and was on my way home. Despite the fog, it was a pretty chill night with almost no other cars on the road. About a minute later, I'm coming up towards an intersection of a small side street, and I see what looks like a big wavering garbage can or tree on the sidewalk. I couldn't make it out very well as I was approaching due to the fog, and I think to myself, that dude looks creepy. I get closer to it and did a double take with a huge, scared shock going through my body. It was what looked like a slender, pitch-black figure with either a shovel or pitchfork, making extremely odd, jerking motions with his object toward the ground. I said out loud, "What the heck did I just see?" to myself. It disappeared in the fog behind me as I was driving, and I didn't want to turn around to drive past it again. I just thought, whatever, and kept driving. The next thing I noticed gave me the worst shock of anxiety and panic I've ever felt. On the next street up, I saw an intersection that I thought was strange, because I didn't remember seeing so many shops in this spot before. As I drove past the light, I see the Taco Bell sign to my left. I was on the street where I started. That was impossible. The route to the Taco Bell is literally a straight shot on the main street from the street I live on. I don't make any turns until I get to my street. I couldn't have gotten turned around somewhere. It was definitely not a different one, as I instantly recognized the same characteristics and began to recognize the street names as I drove past. I know I didn't accidentally go to a different one further up. I specifically remembered the drive-thru lady I regularly see when I go there. I didn't remember specifically what corner I saw the strange figure on earlier, but I didn't notice anything as I made my way home. I'm really weirded out by this and haven't stopped thinking about it. I don't have any history of hallucinations or time lapses, and I've been afraid to tell anyone about it. Is there any reasonable explanation for what happened to me? Or did I experience a real glitch? 8. This happened about a year or two ago, and I still vividly remember it because of how weird it was. So one day I'm walking home from school, and I was walking down the main street towards the side street that we live on. Suddenly, I saw a red Suzuki that looked exactly like my mom's red Suzuki drive past me down to the end of the main street and turn onto our street. Now, sometimes my mom would arrive home from wherever she was at roughly the same time as me, and if she saw me walking home, she would stop and give me a lift the rest of the way. This time, she didn't stop. I didn't think much of it. She probably just didn't notice me. Not a minute later, I saw my mom in her red Suzuki drive past me, see me, and stop just ahead to pick me up. At this point, I was all like, but I was still looking down towards the end of the main street to try and spot the other Suzuki. Why? Our street is a dead end. If it would have taken a wrong turn, it would have had to come back the way it came. And I had been watching the entrance to our street the whole time and hadn't seen it come back out. Now, as far as I'm aware, no one on our small, short street has the exact same model of car as my mom. So I thought, maybe a friend is visiting someone on our street and they've parked around the corner. We turned the corner. Nothing. No sign of it. I looked down every driveway as we passed. Nothing. Gone. Disappeared into thin air. I may never find out exactly what happened that day, but I like to think that somehow an alternate timeline temporarily leaked into ours. And in that timeline, the only difference was my mom didn't notice me walking home. 9. I very vividly remember being 7 years old and having my mom tell me she would go grocery shopping for like an hour or two, so she was going to leave me home by myself. This was one of the first times that I was left home alone, so I was a little nervous. I followed her to the door and waved goodbye, then watched her get into the car and leave. Then, a couple of seconds later, as I started heading up to my bedroom, I heard the doorbell go off. I looked out the little windows beside the door, and there she was, just a couple of seconds later, with about 4 heavy plastic bags on her hands. My mom. I opened the door up, confused as ever. My first instinct was to tell her, "How did you get here so early? You just left." to which she responded with, "It's been 2 hours. You must have fallen asleep or something," which I had not. Last time I mentioned it to her was a couple of years ago, and she had no memory of it. 10. I was 16, and I was working for a moving company. We were in downtown Louisville, Kentucky, and were just finishing up an office move. We maybe had a couple of hours left to go. The whole crew decided to grab a bite to eat before we finished up the job. My friend and I were in charge of taking the old furniture to the basement for cleanup the next day, where we would take unwanted items to our warehouse. We got to the basement, dropped off what we had in our hands, and decided to go upstairs and walk to 4th Street to meet the guys, about a block away. When we walked back up the stairs, we did not recognize anything we had seen all day. All we saw were more stairs and a long hallway. We took the hallway, and it led us to another stairwell. We had no choice but to go down those stairs. We went down the stairs only to be met with the same hallway. We decided to retrace our steps and went back to the basement. We were on the other side of the basement and saw that most of the stuff we placed there all day was on the wrong side, and there was a lot more of it. We then proceeded to go back up the stairs we took 100 times that day, and a door led us outside. We look at our watches, and we've lost 30 or 40 minutes. We were surprised to walk out and realize we were a few blocks away from where we were working from. Took us 15 or so minutes to get to 4th Street, where the rest of the crew were just ordering and congratulating themselves on a job well done. After the meal, the supervisor told everyone to do a last sweep around the offices for personal items and trash. Once we did, everyone was piling in the trucks. We apparently finished with the job. It was at that point that we came to the realization that although we thought we only lost 30 to 40 minutes, time went through 3 hours, and they finished the job without us. We lost 3 hours worth of work, and transported a few blocks away, even across several streets, because of this glitch. 11. So, my parents and I slept in the living room because it's very cold and our fireplace is there. They slept on the big couch, and I slept on the smaller one. My dad's alarm clock woke me up, and as they were getting ready to go to work, I was on my phone. My dad left first. Then my mom got up, and we drank coffee together. She got ready and left about a half an hour later. I went to the bathroom, and when I got back in the living room, my mom was sleeping, and she woke up 2 to 3 minutes later and started getting ready for work. 12. On the afternoon of September 23, 1880, on a farm just a few miles outside of Gallatin, Tennessee, a remarkable event was witnessed by 5 people. The farm was occupied by farmer David Lang and his family, his wife Emma, his 2 children, 8-year-old George and 11-year-old Sarah, and their household servant. On that afternoon, the children were playing in the front yard when Mr. and Mrs. Lang came out of their house this time. Mrs. Lang was becoming house as neighbors were called with an alarm bell. By nightfall, all the neighbors were involved in the search, and by lantern they checked every foot of the field, stamping their feet to try to detect any holes that Mr. Lang might have fallen into. Nothing was found. In the following weeks, Mrs. Lang was bedridden with shock. All the family servants, except the cook, Suki, left, and curiosity seekers were chased away from the farm by the local authorities. The county surveyor confirmed that the field was on perfectly solid ground with no caves or sinkholes. Months after the occurrence, in 1881, Lang's children noticed that the grass at the site of their father's disappearance had grown strange and yellow and formed a circle with a 15-foot diameter. Sarah called to her father, and seemingly as a result, both the children heard him faintly calling for help, over and over, until his voice faded away. Mrs. Lang never fully recovered, and there was never a funeral or memorial service for Mr. Lang. Mrs. Lang eventually left the farm and allowed Judge Peck to rent it out, with the exception of the field in the front of the house. That pasture was left untouched as long as she lived. In these 12 strange yet true stories, there's proof that the world is an unusual place, filled with many quirks and glitches. If you have any strange stories that you would like to share, send them to strangebutTrueStories2@gmail.com. That's strangebutTrueStories and the number 2@gmail.com. I'm Steve White. Until next time.
So last week I read you the story Prison is Hell.
Did a lot of research on aliens and aliens. They come from demons. I'll put some links in here where you can see that research, but I wanted you to see some people that are totally deceived, or at least one individual. But he's deceived with a reason. That's the scary part, because it's the deception goes to a media outlet that basically presents it to the entire nation, and in some cases the world. This is it.
Over time and time again on these things as you're trying to get the word out that, you know, you're a pretty aware person, you know, as far as that, but you just like go, well, I'm trying to get the word out, maybe I'll get screwed, maybe I won't, but I'm just going to go for it anyway. Is that your attitude, or what?
Well, it's been my attitude. Now my attitude is I just don't want that to happen anymore, you know. So I'm very reluctant to believe what anybody tells me anymore.
Right. But have you developed an intuitive sense, perhaps, now? I mean, 'cause you know how that can do. It can start shutting you down from certain experiences or certain places where you might need to be.
That's true, and to a certain extent, I have an intuitive sense of where somebody's coming from, but it doesn't always work. You know, that's what makes a con man a good con man, is that you get the perception that they're telling you the truth.
Okay.
And so someone who's really good at it,
right,
can know you. Or me, anyway. I don't know about you.
Hold on 1 second. Let me grab my...
Yeah, you want to wipe your face or anything?
No,
You got it? Okay. You all right, Robert?
Mm-hmm. Robert, you set? Yes, I am. Scott, you're set?
Yes.
Bill, you ready?
Yep.
Bill, well, thanks for agreeing to the interview. First of all, a little bit about your background. You had extensive military service for many years prior to 1970, where a certain aspect of that military service kicked upstairs, so you were able to see
certain things that you were not able to see beforehand. Would you tell us a little bit about that?
It actually started much longer in my past than that. I was reared in a military family. My father's an Air Force colonel. He's retired now. He was a command pilot. And as a child, I remember sitting around I remember the pilots at our house sitting around the kitchen table talking about their exploits in the cockpit and what they had seen in the skies. And some of that talk involved UFOs and what some of them called Foo Fighters. And I traveled all over the world, lived on military bases for most of my life. I was really an indoctrinated individual, you might say. I was as establishment as you could get, as gung-ho, pro-government, pro-America, pro-military. And that's why I went into the military, because that had been so much of my life. I went into the Air Force. I was in the Strategic Air Command for 4 years as an aircraft and missile hydraulic technician, which is, I worked on the pneumatic and hydraulic systems of B-52 bombers, KC-135 aircraft, and Minuteman missiles. I had a secret security clearance. That's where I saw my first atomic bomb. I mean, we worked around in these planes, especially the ones on the alert pad, were always loaded, ready to go drop these bombs at a moment's notice. But while I was in the Air Force, I met sergeants, men who were older than me, and had been in the Air Force for quite a while, told me that they had participated in projects that had recovered crashed extraterrestrial craft, what you call UFOs. And they never told these stories unless they had quite a bit to drink. So I never really believed it. I thought, well, these guys are running a scam on me, you know, even though I'd heard about these things when I was a kid. I just still didn't believe in them. They're just so far out in left field, it's not something that you really give any serious thought to until something personal happens, which came later. While I left the Air Force, I went into the Navy, which is really where I wanted to be in the first place. I'd always had this tremendous feeling and connection with the ocean. I was an excellent swimmer, but I had a problem as a child. I had chronic motion sickness. If I got in a car and we went on a long trip, I got deathly ill. And same with boats or anything. I couldn't ride on the things at the carnival that went around and round because it just made me tremendously ill. But I decided after I had gone through the Air Force experience that sick or not, you know, I was going to go in the Navy because that's really what I had wanted to do. So I did. Volunteered for submarine duty and was assigned to the USS Tyru, SS-416, which was a diesel-electric boat, World War II type, that had been reconfigured. When I went on board the boat, it was in the dry dock at Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard and had literally been cut in half. They put in a 12-foot sonar section and then 3 domes on the deck for triangulating targets using sonar. And this was really one of the most up-to-date electronically submarines that we had. Wasn't a nuclear submarine, but as far as the ability to approach, get close to a target and destroy it, it had a better capacity to do that than any other boat that we had. While we were on a transit from the Portland-Seattle area on the surface, I actually saw, I was the port lookout, and I saw the most incredible thing that I think I've ever seen in my life. And it had such a profound effect upon my view of the universe and the world that we live in that I wish everybody could experience this. I saw come up out of the ocean, from beneath the surface of the sea, a huge disc-shaped craft about the size of a Midway-class aircraft carrier, which is tremendous in size. Even though that's one of our smallest carriers, or was then, it's still a huge, tremendously big object. Came up out of the ocean and rose into the air and tumbled on its axis and went up into the clouds, and I was awestruck, dumbstruck. And I mean dumbstruck, literally. I could not utter a sound. And my first impulse was to tell the officer of the deck that I'd seen a flying saucer, and then luckily for me I couldn't talk. because on second thought, that's not what I really wanted to say, because I didn't want to be the only Looney Tunes character on a submarine with a tight-knit crew that you had to live in close quarters with, because that's a hell of a way to live. So I told the officer of the deck that I'd seen something about 15 degrees off the port bow at a relative distance of about 2.5 nautical miles. And he began to look in that area. And the starboard lookout had heard me tell him this, and he began to look over there. And while we were all three watching, either the same craft or another one exactly like it came down out of the clouds, tumbled again on its, why it did this maneuver, I don't know, but every single time it did it. It's like it came down in this attitude, and then it flipped over, and then entered the water. And the water just appeared to open up in front of it. It's just like the account in the Bible about the parting of the Red Sea. That's exactly what happened. The sea actually parted, and this thing went into the water, and it closed up behind it. And this big spray went up into the air. But it wasn't a spray from the craft hitting the water. It was a spray from the water coming back in to fill up this hole that had been created. And again, I'm thinking, this is incredible. What are we looking at here? And it was metal. It was a machine, and it wasn't glowing or anything like that. It didn't have any lights on it that we could see. But it was obviously metal, and it was obviously a machine. And although I can't tell you that there was anyone inside of it, I believe that there was. And it did something that, as far as I knew, was absolutely impossible. I'd been in the Air Force. I'd worked on the state-of-the-art of our aviation capabilities. And here I was on the deck of a submarine in the conning tower, and I knew what we had to be able to have to go underwater, and I knew that the two were incompatible. Here's something that came from under the water and flew in the air and performed maneuvers, and then came back down and interfaced with the water at tremendous speed and remained intact, which realistically it never touched the water. The water sort of magically opened up in front of it, but something had to interface with that water. Anything that we had that interfaced with the water in that manner would have been disintegrated. It's like hitting a brick wall. So I was looking at a technology that, as far as our laws of physics and what we knew at that time, didn't exist. This was in 1966. Ensign Ball was as shocked as I was. He called the captain to the bridge. He came up with the chief quartermaster, who brought a camera. And we all stood there and watched this occur over and over again for about 10 minutes. And I still, to this day, don't know if it was the same craft or a whole bunch of different craft going in and out of the water. But it seemed like that there was a hell of a lot of traffic on that freeway right there. And we were watching it as we went by. We never changed course. We never lowered or increased our speed. We made no attempt to communicate or signal. We made no attempt to get closer. And eventually, it just stopped. We were told not to discuss it with anyone, not even amongst ourselves, which was incredible. I never had been told anything like that in my life. You can't talk about something. And to be told that we couldn't even talk about it amongst ourselves was even more extraordinary, I thought. But we didn't. We didn't talk about it. When we got to Pearl Harbor, all the time the chief quartermaster was taking pictures of this. So I know photographs were made. What happened to those photographs, I have no idea. But when we reached Pearl Harbor, we were not allowed to go ashore to go on liberty, even though we didn't have the duty. And about 2 hours after we berthed at the submarine base, a commander from the Office of Naval Intelligence came on board and debriefed each one of us individually in the captain's stateroom. And the ultimate outcome of the debrief, that we didn't see anything, we didn't hear anything, we had to read rules and regulations that told us that if we ever talked about what it was that we didn't see, that we could be imprisoned, we could be fined $10,000, we could lose all pay and allowances due or ever to become due. And I learned at that moment that the United States Navy didn't want anybody to know about what we saw. and that severe consequences could come down around the neck of anybody who did. And that was when I understood fully that, yeah, there's a real cover-up. These things do exist, number one, and at least the United States Navy doesn't want anybody to know about it. And there's stiff penalties for anybody who bucks that.
Mm-hmm. Moving forward a few years from, what, 1966, I believe, you gained a special security clearance that revealed to you certain documents, or were revealed to you, or that you saw, relating to this very cover-up.
To this and many other things. I was eventually trained by Naval Security and Intelligence, and I was given a secondary NEC, which is Naval Enlisted Code, which was 9545, which is Internal Security Specialist. And an Internal Security Specialist is someone who protects classified information and protects areas, so to speak. And I had a specialty, which I was trained in, which was Pacific Area Intelligence Briefings. And I was eventually assigned to the Commander-in-Chief of the United States Pacific Fleet, who was Admiral Bernard Clary at that time, and served as a member of his intelligence briefing team. And basically all that means, we really had a wonderful job. You come in about 4 o'clock in the morning and you go through all the message traffic and everything. And what you do is what we did was that we prepared an updated briefing on everything that was happening in his half of the world, which he commanded the naval forces and marine forces, as a matter of fact. And put all this together in a briefing where we would update him on ongoing operations, brief him about operations that were scheduled to begin, political situations, deployment of Soviet forces, naval forces, everything. And after the briefing was finished, between 8 and 10 o'clock in the morning, then we were done. We were finished. So it was what you call fat cat duty or gedunk duty in the Navy. It's got all different kinds of names. It's just really a wonderful job. Now, to be able to function in this job, I had to have a these people on all of these things. And I'm sure that at first I was tested and wasn't shown a whole lot, but eventually when they began to have confidence in me, I began to see things coming across my desk that were just absolutely incredible. And a lot of it is really hard to talk about because it's so far outside the normal concept of reality for the average American that they're going to find a hard time believing any of it. Mm-hmm. But I saw documents that were labeled under the classification top secret, and the compartmentalized the compartment that was put into was called MAJIC, M-A-J-I-C, which told me that UFOs are real, which I already knew. I'd seen one.
Right.
But this went farther than that. It told me that they were extraterrestrial in origin, that there were 4 different extraterrestrial species or races visiting this Earth, and that they had actually entered into an agreement with the United States government with one of these species of alien beings to exchange technology, and it told me all the projects that was underneath this. Project Red Light was actually the testing of extraterrestrial craft. Project Plato was a diplomatic project. Pounce was the recovery of technology. Pluto was the application of that technology to our own secret space program, not the public space program. There are 2 different space programs. One is what the public gets to see, which is overseen by NASA, and the other one is a secret space program that nobody gets to see, which is really overseen by the Navy Department under specialized, compartmentalized black projects, and what these people are doing in secret is just absolutely incredible. I also saw documents under an operation called Operation Majority, which outlined the plans to bring together a one-world government. It also included extraterrestrial information within that. Project Grudge, which was the second project. First was Sign, and then Project Grudge, which contained all of the extraterrestrial information up to a certain point. I forget the year cutoff. And then it was contained after that in another project called Project Aquarius, which was the accumulation of the whole history of alien interaction on planet Earth. But I have to say at this point that I don't know if those documents were really telling the truth or not. They could have been showing me these things so that eventually I would go out and talk about this. And maybe that'll become clear to you later why they may have done that. It could be real. So. But
at this point, from a personal standpoint, what was it that, based on your experience in '66, and they said, absolutely do not reveal this to anybody, and here we are a few years later, and you're seeing documents that prove that what you saw was real. What was the one factor or a number of factors that led you to the decision to say, I've got to get this out, I've got to tell people about this?
I saw contingency plans called Majestic. And these contingency plans were to, first place, a contingency is a plan that can be implemented if certain things occur. And the certain things that would have tripped this contingency plan are, number one, the public sector is getting too close to the truth, so they have to implement this to get them steered off the track. Or number two, we don't want to tell the public the truth about the alien presence, but there's so much alien activity occurring that the public is on the verge of finding out anyway. Let's tell them this story so that it doesn't cause consequences that we don't want. And that plan was called Majestic. I was in a bookstore one time. I'd never seen UFO magazine. Didn't even know it existed. In fact, I didn't even know that there was a UFO culture in the world of people who study UFOs or worship UFOs or have little UFO meetings. I had no idea that was occurring. I was in a bookstore one time and I was looking at the magazine rack. I'm an avid reader and I'm always in bookstores. And this one day I saw a magazine just popped right out at me, at UFO. And I picked it up and I looked inside, and here is Majestic, all right there. And even the people who had been named to implement the plan were the ones who were actually implementing it. William Moore, Stanton Friedman. I'd never heard of Jamie Chandray, but he was named, and they had brought out a supposed genuine document called the Eisenhower Briefing Document, which in reality is a fraudulent document. It's a fake, and it was created to implement the plan Majestic, to either indoctrinate the public on what the government wants the public to perceive as happening, or to steer researchers away from the truth, or both.
So this wasn't revealing the plan of Majestic, but it was actually implementing the plan.
Implementing the plan against the public. It was a psychological operation against the public.
So this is what you saw.
So immediately my head began to spin around, and I began to think, God, I've got to tell people that they're being manipulated. This is a lie. And it really, if the public were using their own intellect, they would know that it was a lie. The executive order quoted for this document was 92,000 something. I believe it was 92447, which is 92,447. And it was supposedly written by Truman. But Truman never wrote an executive order higher than 9,000. I mean, even today, there's no executive order with the number 92,000 on it. They've been consecutive since the beginning.
So it was clearly fraudulent.
So it's clearly fraudulent, but the public doesn't catch on to this. And here you got Stanton Friedman, one of the guys who implemented the contingency plan, Majestic, running around the country telling everybody it's not an executive order, it's a date, September 24th, 1947, which it very well could be a date. But it's listed in that document as being an executive order of the President of the United States, Harry Truman. And because of that, it's fake. And many other things. But specifically, that is the most glaring proof of fraudulent intent in the document. There are many other things in the document that also prove it's a forgery. But here they are. They're running this contingency plan, and here I am. I know all about it, and here's the public out there biting it. They even ran that thing in the New York Times, like a 2 or 3 page spread showing all the documents. So it had tremendous credibility lent to it by that action. And so I decided that I had to tell the public and get people on the right track, which is, the right track is don't believe anybody. Okay. Don't believe me. Don't believe George Bush. Don't believe anyone. You got to get proof in your hand before you can believe anything. And to do otherwise today is the biggest mistake that anyone can ever make. You begin believing people, putting your trust in them, that they're telling you the truth. I guarantee you, you're going to take a ride on a roller coaster you don't want to be on.
Mm-hmm. Now this controversy, and I say the very understatement controversy.
Yes.
It also is now extending, based on some things that you're revealing, into the Kennedy assassination.
Yes, in the set of documents, which really was literally 2 or 3 file cabinets of documents, called Operation Majority, I saw documents which told me what happened in Dallas and why. And basically what these documents said was that the intelligence community felt that John F. Kennedy was a threat to the national security, which translated into reality means was a threat to the New World Order, the one world government which they were actively in the process of forming.
Was there anything on record that indicated that he was out to, things that he did would threaten that New World Order?
Oh, absolutely. He had written an executive order. I don't remember the exact number now, but it's available to anybody that wants to go look it up. He had written an executive order ordering the printing of United States notes, which would have broken the back of the Federal Reserve, which is one of the major instruments of propelling the United States into the New World Order by destroying our economy, the basis upon which we live, the basis upon which our whole society is founded, is being ripped right out from under us. That was one. Number 2, he refused to provide air support for the invasion of Bay of Pigs, which ensured that would be a failure. He had threatened publicly on several occasions to disband the CIA and scatter it to the 1,000 winds. He had ordered, in the documents that I saw, he had ordered the intelligence community to prepare a plan to disclose the truth about UFOs to the public. Now, I don't know what that small hypodermic needle or a poison dart, using any one of many different deadly poisons. Specifically, it said that he fired an exploding pellet which contained shellfish toxin, and that the act was plainly visible in a film withheld from the public. I looked for 16 years to find that film, and I finally found a copy that showed William Greer turn around and shoot the president, and since 1988 I've been showing that film wherever I'm able to show it, to wake people up. It is not our government, though you have to understand, that is doing these things. It is not our government that's failing us. It's not the Constitution or the Bill of Rights that's a bad instrument. It is a group of men who belong to secret societies, who have infiltrated our society and our government at all levels and are destroying it and subverting it from within. And every member of naval intelligence that I knew who was an officer was a 32nd or a 33rd degree Freemason. And I asked my commanding officer at one point, I said, why are all you guys Masons? He said, Masons are used to keeping secrets. It's part of their fraternity. So if you want someone who already knows how to keep a secret, you recruit Freemasons. Well, later on, I found out what the truth is. The truth is you're not going to be a naval intelligence officer unless you are a Freemason or a member of the Ancient Order of the Rose and Cross, but you have to be high degrees for that. I think the reason I was selected as enlisted man is because I had belonged to the Demolay Society.
Which is what?
As a teenager. That's sort of the first level of Freemasonry. That's how they recruit teenagers and indoctrinate them into their principles so that they go right into Freemasonry when they become an adult. So basically that's the story. Yeah.
Okay. Well, based on the information that you're revealing, which would seem to be equally or if not more of a threat than what Kennedy was originally planning on doing, is actually revealing the underlying cause of all of this. Why is it that you are here today, or how is it that you are here today and you're not, conveniently taken away and put in a padded cell somewhere so that you can't speak of these things?
Well, I really don't know the true answer to that question, because you would have to ask them to find out why they haven't done anything. But I can tell you this. I began to reveal information in 1976, and I was physically attacked on 2 occasions. My skull was caved in. That's what all these scars are here. On the second attack, I lost my leg. They visited me in the hospital. They had no intention of killing me. They were delivering a message to me. Shut up. And that was the message that came through loud and clear. And 2 men who identified themselves with identification cards who belonged to the Defense Investigative Service, which is really the Defense Intelligence Agency, asked me if I was going to shut up or they were going to have to do it right. And I told them, I said, you don't have to worry about me. I'm going to be a good little boy for the rest of my life, and yeah, I'm going to shut my mouth. And I did for 16 years. Kept silent until I saw this UFO magazine in a bookstore, which indicated that they had implemented the contingency plan called Majestic. But if you want to know what I think the reason is, I believe that there are several. One, they've had a plan that's been in force since the 40s to debunk, ridicule, destroy anybody who ever talks about these subjects. And the public has been thoroughly indoctrinated that if you talk about any of these things that I'm talking about, you're just another nut. So the public, by and large, doesn't pay any attention to it. So in that sense, I'm not a threat. If the president had come on television and said, hey, this is what's going on, then they would have listened and they'd pay attention to it. But people like me, they perceive me as being just another loony bin, fruitcake, nut, which I assure you I'm not. But that's the perception that they've been brainwashed into believing. And so that's what they believe. Number 2, I am so much in front of the public from the very beginning when I began to talk. And that's how I protected myself, or at least that's what I thought would protect me, and so far it's proven to be right, was that if I got literally in front of the public overnight, in front of a large public, that they wouldn't do anything to me because it would substantiate what it was that I'm saying. And they certainly don't want to do that. It would also create a martyr. And martyrs create tremendously dangerous political movements that they don't want that either. So literally within a 24-hour period, I spent $27,000 mailing a thick packet of information all over the world to people I'd never heard of, didn't know. We went down and got some mailing lists and just mailed this stuff all over the world. And so literally, when people opened these packages in their mailbox, and it was a perfect plan because they couldn't stop it. They didn't even know I was going to do it in the first place. And since we sent it all over the world, once it was out, there's no way they could retrieve it. At least no way that I can conceive of. So literally within 24 hours, I was a public presence. And people were asking all over the world, who's Bill Cooper? Is this true? Look what I got in the mail. And just literally flip the world over on its ear. And I've been in front of the public ever since. So I think basically those are the reasons. They don't believe that the public's really going to listen to me, and so far that's been true. There is a small group of people all over the world who are awakening, who are beginning to understand that they've been living their life in fantasy land, and who are actively seeking the truth. But by and large, when the secret power structure says, as I've put in the first chapter of my book, right out of one of their own technical manuals, that a nation or world of people who do not use their intelligence are no better than animals who do not have intelligence, and thus are stakes on the table by choice and consent, they're absolutely right about the majority of people. It's one of the things that has been an illumination to me, is that they're not always wrong. And many of their goals are the right goals, but the method that they're using to reach that goal is the wrong method. In other words, if you set out to create a perfect world where there will never be any more killing, but to reach that point, you kill 2 billion people, you have become what you're trying to avoid.
Right.
And it can't happen that way. If you want to create a world of peace, it has to be done by peaceful methods.
Means.
Yeah, if you murder someone to destroy a murderer, you have become what it was you set out to destroy, and thus it wasn't destroyed at all. It was perpetuated by that very action. And that's what these men are doing. They rationalize everything they do so that they feel better about it. But what they are doing is becoming what it is that they want to get rid of, and the world will never be a safe place for anyone as long as there are men who do these things.
Very eloquently said. Thank you.
Thank you.
Your message to people, once again, is don't believe anything. How
right.
is it that the public can find this and search for this truth on their own if they can't believe anything or anyone? What can you do?
It's all in the public sector. It's all of it. Actively and diligently seeks it out. Everything that's in my book, Behold a Pale Horse, is everything in here, all the documents that are in here, everything that's in this book is in the public domain.
Can be substantiated?
Yes, and I intentionally wrote this book not using anything that wasn't available to the public to show people that, yes, if I can find this information, so can you. I have tons of stuff that's not available to the public. But as you can see by reading this book, you don't need that stuff, because it's what you need is available to you. Public libraries are overflowing with the proof of what's really going on in the world, but nobody really utilizes it to the extent that they're able to pick this out and put it together. Another thing I've done for people is I've put it together for them so that they can see the overall picture, rather than looking at small things and thinking that it's isolated. Nothing is isolated. It's all part of a big puzzle. And the puzzle is coming together, and when the puzzle is assembled, it's going to be a one-world totalitarian socialist government that nobody's going to like except the people that are running it. It's Hitler all over again. And the rationalization is, we're going to create the world without war. It is in the Bible. They're either following it, just like a plan, and bringing the prophecies in there to pass to manipulate and control those who believe in those prophecies and neutralize them, so to speak. In other words, if this is written in the Bible and God has ordained it, who am I to resist? It must come to pass, so I'm not going to try to stop it.
Okay.
What a perfect way to neutralize the opposition right off the bat. Or there really is a God, and what he said was going to come to pass is coming to pass. And I named this, Behold a Pale Horse, from chapter 13 of the book of Revelations. The fourth horseman of the apocalypse is the pale horse. And I looked, and behold a pale horse, and his name that sat upon him was Death. And hell followed with him, and power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth, to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with the beasts of the earth. And that is taking place now today. The fourth horseman is riding across the world now. That's what AIDS is all about. That's what all these little brush fire wars all over the world are all about. That's what's happening. That's why cancer cures are suppressed. Is because they fully intend to kill a minimum of 2 billion people by the year 2000. AIDS is an invention of man. It is not a natural disease, and it has been implemented and placed into the population as a population control. And when they did it, they had the cure before they did it. Mm-hmm. And when they deem that enough people have died or been killed, they will say, we have a cure for AIDS. And everybody will be called to report to some place to get an inoculation, which is going to do two things. One, it's going to stop AIDS in its tracks. And number two, it's going to implant a device which will be able to be used to track each individual person and maybe even to control those people. And that's what the pet implant program is all about. It's not about finding lost pets. They don't give a damn about pets, and they would never put a satellite in orbit to find a lost pet, but yet there's a satellite up there that they're using to find pets that have been implanted with these devices. They're testing this program on pets that's going to be used in human beings. And in the Los Angeles Times in 1989, they ran an article. It was 10 forecasts for the coming decade, was the title of the article. I have a copy of it in my research center. And number 5, I believe it was number 5, in those 10 forecasts for the coming decade was chemical or electronic implants to control individual behavior on a 24-hour basis, unquote. So it's not hidden at all. It's there for anybody who wants to look.
But nobody's looking.
Nobody's looking. They believe, and I believe that they're right, that the biggest danger to mankind right now is man himself, population. A study in 1957 told them that by 1990 the world population would double in 33 years. Can you imagine that? The world population of human beings doubled in 33 years. Mm-hmm. And they knew that it's an exponential doubling throughout history. Every time it's doubled, the interval has gotten shorter. So that was 33 years. The next doubling will take place in approximately 28 years. The next one after that, approximately 24 years. Can you imagine if the world population doubles again in 28 years from 1990? In other words, in the year 2018, the world population doubles. And we're having problems with food supplies and timber and clean water and clean air now. And then after that, it doubles again in another 24 years. That's why they created AIDS. Because they didn't want to have to go around the world and say, you, and you up against the wall, you've got to die today. And shoot them. They did it in a manner to where they could target what they consider to be undesirable populations. And I want to be very clear that I don't agree with them on this. They specifically targeted blacks, Hispanics, and homosexuals for complete eradication. And AIDS is really going through those populations, and it's really doing a number of blacks, Hispanics, and homosexuals.
That theory has made news. I've heard that before, and
this
it's been
isn't a
debunked
theory.
very clear by the public, saying, "Oh, that's ridiculous." But you're saying that that may indeed be the case.
It's not ridiculous. I actually saw this in documents, and the project name was Project Naomi. MK Naomi was the name of it. It was a CIA project, the AIDS, whatever causes AIDS, whatever that turns out to be, according to those documents, was developed at Fort Detrick, Maryland, under a CIA project called MK Naomi. It was financed by $10 million for the Department of the Army's biological warfare programs. It was carried out, supervised by the CIA, carried out by scientists who worked for the Special Operations Division of the Department of Defense. And it's doing its job.
And would you assume if AIDS doesn't work, there's a contingency plan for that even?
Well, I think that they have other things out there working concurrently. One thing I've learned about these men is they don't just do one thing. In case the public discovers what they're doing, or discovers that somebody's doing, whether they know who's really doing it or not, and stops it, what they have running is several concurrently running plans, so that if one or two fail, the other ones are going to take care of the problem.
It sounds pretty hopeless. I mean, based on that scenario, is there anything, any uprising or what?
Yeah, there is, but it requires that people wake up. It requires that they really learn the truth instead of live their life in fantasy land. You see, because nothing can exist without the consent of the people. Unless they buy it, it's not going to happen. And all of these plans lead to the public's ultimate acceptance of what they're going to do. In fact, they're designed to make the public ask for it. For instance, the burning of the rainforest in Brazil. I know people who are just up in arms. Stop this. We've got to stop the burning of the rainforest, which is exactly what the burning of the rainforest is designed to do. Because Brazil is a sovereign nation, right? How can you tell a sovereign nation to stop burning its own forest? You can't. What they're asking for is control over a sovereign nation by a world governing body who can then send troops, a police force, to make Brazil stop burning the rainforest, and that's why they started the burning of the rainforest in the first place. You see, they went down there and they built a road across the Amazon jungle that went nowhere. There was no reason for this road to be built. There was no place to go. It doesn't go from here to a city on the other side. It just goes across the jungle and ends. And they built this road on purpose because they knew that most of the people in Brazil are so dirt poor that they would see this road as the answer to their prayers. Free land, free timber, a way to support their family, a way to become wealthy, or at least more wealthy than they were, which was no wealthy. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what happened. Millions of people headed out down this road and staked out some land and burned the forest and tried to grow crops. And they found that rainforest is no good for growing crops. It'll grow one crop, and then you got to go burn more trees and plant another crop because the soil is poor. And that's what's happening. Mm-hmm. And that's why the forest is being burned. And it was done intentionally to create the scream of stop burning the rainforest, so that then they could offer the solution. The solution is a world governing body that can then order and enforce that order of Brazil to stop burning the rainforest. Guy is anarchist. People on the right want no control.